Jamie, thank you so much for agreeing to give us some of your time this morning and join us for a show of the Responsible Edge. I know you and I connected some time ago, and we've been really looking forward to having this conversation. I think this has become especially interesting time to have a conversation post the events in the US in the last couple of weeks. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on today.
I'm glad we got to meet and chat it all through.
Brilliant stuff, Jamie. So as you well know, the first sort of 20 minutes or so is going to be all about you and sharing with our listeners your, and I mean, say this with real sincerity, fascinating background. 20 minutes is not going to be enough. So we're not going to be able to go into all the depth and detail, but wherever you would like to start, please feel free to share your story with our listeners. And I think in particular, if you wouldn't mind, with the nature of our show, talk about the role that ethics and responsibility and sustainability has played in the decisions that you've made throughout your career.
I think that when you glitter or when you gloss over everything you do and you think you've got a pretty good head on your shoulders and you think you're doing things the right way, that's one way to go about things. And I've always been somebody who fights for the underdog or refuses to punch down or wants to support and elevate younger people that haven't had the same opportunities that I've had. On the one hand, on the other hand, I worked in magazines. I worked in events. I ran National Burger Day and London Seafood Festival. And I was a stylist for 10 years. So there were elements of it where I could show that I was a feminist and mentor younger women, but not really mainstay to what I did or how I behaved. And then when the Charlie Hebdo massacre occurred, I was at the magazines and we were in conference, like we're always in conference, and we kind of stumbled out of the building and went to Trafalgar Square, and we saw every other journalist that was as in shock and upset as we were. And then fast forward to the pandemic. And during the pandemic, when Sarah Everard went missing and her face was everywhere, I was in lockdown. I lived alone as a woman, and it was like they're telling us the only way we could stay safe and alive was to stay in our own homes. And I was like, well, how small does my life have to become to make it still worth living? Like, am I not supposed to get Ocado because most of my Ocado delivery men are men? Am I not supposed to get taxis? How much do I have to do, and how tiny does my existence have to become where it's respected enough that I kept myself alive rather than that men stop killing us? And during the first lockdown, I quit drinking and I didn't have work for the first time in my life because being running an events agency in a pandemic is not a great plan. Didn't know that could happen. And so when tragically Sarah's body was found, I tweeted that I could put on a vigil. And I tweeted that I could put on a vigil because I knew all kinds of women journalists. I knew how to do PR. And so I knew how to make that machine go, but I knew how to make a safe space for women to come together and grieve. And I hadn't seen my best friend. I hadn't hugged any of my friends. I'd been alone and I wanted to rage and I needed to be around other people that were feeling as bereft as I was. And in my wildest dreams, I never expected the next message to be that we were not allowed to do so. And in the police trying to suppress young women having a moment of silence for a woman that one of their own had killed, they treated it like it was a rave. And so we were going to be fined £10,000 each and prosecuted under the Serious Crimes Act for holding a moment of silence for a young woman that a police officer had killed. It was so beyond the scope. It like that moment, my life became the thick of it, and it really hasn't stopped being the thick of it since.
It's just, Jamie, the mind boggles the degree, the lack of appreciation and understanding of the circumstances, and to act and behave in that way is just astonishing. It's a true shooting yourself in the foot moment for the police.
But also, like Harriet Harman, who was a barrister, wrote to them, not only do we have a reasonable excuse that she would be attending with her daughter. Like the night it was happening, I had MPs calling me. We'd gotten our legal team, which was like Adam Wagner, who was the person on Sky all the time saying, this is governance, this is law, this is advice. So we got in touch with them on Twitter. Rest in peace, Twitter. But the way it all came about was so antagonistic. And so we're going to put these little girls back in their box that we weren't a real threat. So they were going to show us and they were going to silence us. That like, I'm a girl from Philly. You want to go? Let's go. At that point, I had nothing to lose. I was calling us the Clapham Nine. And like, I am the fightiest MFer that you're ever going to meet. Like, I try, like, I absolutely thrive on conflict. And the arrogance and the antagonistic aspect. Like, I came from stylists. I thought that they would be rolling out red carpets and that individually would be handing us tissues. And the absolute way they misjudged it, they were told they misjudged it, and then they dug their heels in. So we ended up raising 45 grand the Thursday night. So Wednesday night I tweeted. The Thursday I was put in touch with local people that were doing the same thing. We joined forces. 2:00 or 1:30 on Thursday, we found out that it was going to be illegal. We had to raise 40 grand because you have to cover the other side's cost. We did that in 45 minutes on Thursday night. And on Friday, we were in high court. Like, I'm a girl from Philly. I've no dealing with the court systems here, nothing. And it was so nuts. And it was so an own goal. And as we sat there, like, they were saying it was a proportionate review, which I had to understand as well, because it wasn't just you can go ahead or you can't go ahead. It was that the police had to decide proportionately between the risk to health and safety versus our human right to protest. And they had to show that they were doing the math and they were doing the work, and that their valuation was it was not worth us having a masked outdoor moment of silence that we could be the biggest spreaders of COVID. So we end up in high court, and the judge says we never should have gotten there, that you need to go away. The police need to give you the parameters. You need to follow them, and then you can go ahead. The Met asks us to pay their cost, which the whole room gasps, and the judge says, absolutely not. You should never have been here. And then as we are in the room with Scotland Yard saying we can do a moving memorial line, we can do 4 to 8 p.m., we can do this, that, and the other thing, they sent out a press release that it would be illegal and we'd be arrested while we were negotiating with them.
What?
Like, the levels of condescension and disrespect it still blows my mind. And every time they did it, they had a woman do it.
So,
and it was.
Sorry, Jamie.
Was
sorry, let me. I mean, you're asking me to peer into the legal world, which is definitely not an area of expertise on my end at all. But that you're literally in the High Court with the judge ruling that you can go ahead.
Well, he's ruling that we can go ahead if we follow the rules they give us.
Right. And then whilst that's happening, they're releasing a press release saying the whole thing's illegal anyway.
Yeah.
Right. That's
and we didn't have time.
Yeah.
We didn't have time to go back. And so the 9 of us had I thought it was going to be 12 angry men. The 9 of us with our legal representatives had one of the most productive meetings of my life. And we went around the room and said, what are we here for? Why are we doing this? And we all decided we were all getting arrested or none of us were. And during our meeting with the Met, we're like, it's going ahead with or without us. It's been 24-hour news. Like, people are going ahead. Us being there doesn't make it. And will you give us like immunity? Because if we cancel it, like you keep telling us we have to cancel and it goes ahead, are we still responsible? And they said, you are still responsible. Well, then why aren't we going ahead? Like, and it just went back and forth and back and forth. So we went around the room and we were talking about it, and we decided that for us, we knew enough people, and we had raised 45 grand in 45 minutes, so we knew that the press and all of the putting us on the front pages would have pulled focus from it being about Sarah Everard being killed. It had become about a protest rule. And it was going to go ahead with or without us. The turning point for all of us was because they were going to fine us £10,000 each, and there were 31 satellite vigils. Probably the best thing I gave to the campaign was like, well, that's 320 grand. That's our target fundraising. Right. And so we decided us not showing up, staying on camera, keeping all eyes on it. But if you don't let someone that looks like me as a white female protest, a white middle-class female expat protest, who are you going to let protest? And by not showing up, we had the purest case imaginable to go forward and to pursue it after the fact. And we had a fundraising hook to say, we will give that money to actual women and girls that are affected by male violence. So by not showing up, by doing the press, we could absolutely rake the Met over the coals for them illegally stopping our right to protest for someone they killed. And we could raise the money and we could keep the court case going and not pull focus from Sarah. So we didn't show up. But in doing so, I was on B-roll with Live with BBC as the police raided the bandstand and watched police kneel on Patsy Stevenson, who I did not know yet, kneel on Patsy and manhandle women at a vigil about male violence and a male police officer killing a young woman. And so the whole thing, like, what
You
would
can't
have,
make it up, can you?
but we
You
would have
can't.
gone back to our lives on Sunday. It would have been a 15-minute event and we would have just gone back to our lives. And instead, like, we met with Sadiq and Cressida separately on the Monday. And I said to Cressida, I was like, knowing what you know now, including a cover of the Mail saying the Met has lost the plot, what would you do differently? And she looked me in the eye and said, absolutely nothing. I asked her to waive the fees of the 4 women that they'd illegally arrested, which later they paid out on. And she told me to write her a letter. And like, honestly, she created a monster. Her antagonistic, anti-woman stance created me.
It's the arrogance as well. It's not just the antagonistic side of it, isn't it? It's just the absolute arrogance to position things in that way, and to not have the humility, even when being, acknowledged as having done wrong, not having the humility in moment to acknowledge that and to change course. Jamie, let me ask you. I think you brilliantly introduced us to the sort of this passion point, if you like, in your life where you just, I don't want to repeat the phrase, created a monster, created a girl with Philly that was going to go.
She activated me. We want to call it activation.
Activated you.
She activated me.
Activated you. But just so before that happened, you mentioned various roles that you've worked on throughout your career in stylists, and magazines, and PR and marketing. In terms of, you'd always been, as I think you mentioned, a feminist, but in terms of sort of, impact, if you like, in the work that you were doing, did that play a key role in your decision making of what you did, or was it really at the Charlie Hebdo moment and then on to Sarah Edvard that things really changed?
It was really the opportunity, and because I wasn't drinking and because I didn't have work, it was kind of the perfect storm. There's no way any of us could have orchestrated to be in the eye of this happening. It was, people were locked down. All of this was happening. We were finding out as we went that a police officer had killed her, like everything coming to light, and having the focus and having the time. And so all of a sudden, like, if we had orchestrated how to get this much media coverage, it would never would have happened. You can't force it, like, but it was the right time, the right place. The anger was there. And then they just kept antagonizing and learning the playbook of, the police had to rush the bandstand because people crowded in to hear a speaker when I had a PA system in my living room that they wouldn't let us use. And so it's like everything they did was, look what you made us do. And they always had women do it. And this is the thing that we've learned so much about the Met, is the women that thrive at the Met have to be assimilated and move over into a position where they lose all of the reasons that they became a police officer. And so you're losing the humility, you're losing the doing it for good, and it becomes something that's warped by power and warped by the us against them. And like, I'm the most unlikely police reform campaigner ever. But the way the road forked out was, I have a lot more room and energy to do this because I've not personally experienced domestic violence at the hands of. I've not personally been a victim, other than them trying to silence us about the vigil, that I can do the campaigning very academically without it being traumatizing. And so I can speak for a lot of victims, whereas women that have experienced this kind of violence intimately, every time they talk about it, they need 3 therapy sessions and need to rejuvenate and to heal. Whereas I can be the fighting warrior for them without it being as damaging to me individually every time I do it. And I think learning that my voice on camera, I'd never been in front of camera. I'd done tons behind, and I've always done big stunts. I've always thought big. Like, I got The Rock to sing happy birthday to my grandma when she turned 100, and it got 24 million views. So I've always done really things that capture the imagination and capture the everyday person root of the human spirit. But this is the first time that I focused all my energies on something that was political and something that had ramifications outside of a funny video or a funny stunt.
And I want to ask you what happened at that point in terms of your career, in terms of what you were, doing, through what organization did what happened at that stage with the circumstance with Sarah?
So Reclaim These Streets was born the Wednesday night. And it was local women who had named it. And then I was put in touch with them, and it was like, local counselors are doing the same thing. You guys should join forces. One of the girls had come to one of my book clubs, so they knew I wasn't a quack, or I wasn't somebody that was just going to jump on a bandwagon. And also I was 20 years older than everybody. So not being registered with labor and being 20 years older meant that it wasn't a partisan issue. So that's how I became one of the claimants in the court case. And then the four of us that ended up being claimants had to keep the fire alive. And it made me and it broke me in a lot of ways. It was I wasn't working, and it was very hard. But then once you come out of it, the other side, and you find your voice, and you find out, actually, I'm pretty good at this, and I'm succinct. I like to spar. So like doing radio, doing television, and because I'm American, I am allowed to be punchier. Class gets erased, and I can say basically anything I want to say. And because I'm white, I don't get the same amount of hate and rhetoric that my Black campaigners get.
So having realized this, summarizing what you said there, this real opportunity, really, coupled with the talent that you clearly have for being in front of the camera, how are you feeling about what you were now doing? What was that experience like what was the feeling like?
It's quite hard to even imagine how much television we did that first week. Like I did, I think 70 interviews that first weekend, because it was rolling 24-hour news, and there were 9 of us, but 2 of us did most of the press. And you just didn't stop. Like there was so much happening. And because she was walking home, and because she was in a bright anorak, and because she called her boyfriend and done all the right things, she was the perfect victim. And we all related to Sarah, because all of the times that any of us had our own experiences, we'd beaten ourselves up for having been drunk, or having done this, or having done that. And we really, like, up until 3 weeks ago, when Giselle Pellicott, who was the victim of horrific 30 years of abuse by her husband and villagers, talking about the shame has to change sides. And I didn't have that language when I started doing this work, but I very much could get some talking lines from my team and then do 50 interviews a night and that not faze me. So the speed and the ability to just have what I need to say and keep going. And when we met with Sadiq Khan, the advice he gave us was like, you've got a 2-day window where the press, the whole public, and the government is behind you right now. Rent it for everything you can get. And we should have gone home after the vigil and gone back to our lives. But everything that the Met did, and everything that has been exposed about the Met since, just kept this in the middle of the world's headlines for the next. And I still do about 2 interviews a week. I did 3 yesterday. So I'm almost 4 years in, and it's still top of the agenda a lot of the time.
And Jamie, I'm gonna push you on this, because it's fascinating and fantastic to hear of the work that you're doing in this area. But how does it make you feel doing this work?
I think you're on a roller coaster a lot of the time. I one night I spoke at Biba and Nicole, which were 2 young sisters that were killed. I spoke at the 2nd year vigil for them outside of Scotland Yard, and said, like, use me as your voice. I can amplify your voices. And a woman came up and was like, me and my kids are going to be dead in 6 months, and handed me their picture. And I have no frontline experience, and I really know how to do the TV, and I really know how to do the radio, and I know how to do awareness work, but I don't know who that person needs to speak to stay alive. And I do know that my individual capacity was, oh my God, if her picture's in the paper, I didn't do enough. I let her die. And so I lost my shit that night. And was crying my eyes out and was trying to figure out, what do I do next? And there were other women there who swooped in and took care of getting her details and helping her individually. But I was like, what I do is just on television. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really get to the meat of it. It doesn't really save lives. And the other women who have a lot more frontline experience, especially Mandu Reed, who's Women's Equality Party, was like, you know how to capture what that woman needs and get it to minds that would not hear her otherwise. And then my boss now, Tina Judick, who's our chairman, runs an SEO performance marketing company. And she's like, I've done this for 10 years. Don't put me in front of a computer to do the SEO. And those kind of perspectives of there's lots of frontline trained people. There's not a lot of people that can do 50 media interviews in a weekend and keep punching and have the strength to go on with that. So I think there's mixed parts of it. I think some parts of it got really dangerous. Somebody made a fake OnlyFans of me and sent it to my dad. When I became the victim rather than the pundit, that was a very, very difficult time. But then again, when I was able to testify to Parliament about deep fakes, that is a way about making it about everyone else and not about an individual attack on me. And I think the more I can globalize my experience and the more I can talk about how women from a very young age are taught to protect themselves and we're not teaching men not to attack them or not to harass them. And the more I can make my experience universal, like when the Instagram fake account happened and the OnlyFans happened, Instagram was like, if it ever happens again, email this number. And I was like, I know it's not my body. I'm 46. I know that the videos aren't of me, but I'm worried about the 16-year-old where it is her body and she kills herself because of it. And these are the girls you're making money off of. So I ended up doing a petition and meeting with the head of women's safety for Instagram. So like, as soon as I can make it a more global problem, I can handle it. When it's just about me, that's when I retreat and have quite a bit of a hard time.
Jamie, it's absolutely, it's astonishing in many ways to hear about the need for the work that you do, but then to hear about the impact of the way that you do it. And I think, and I know you don't need me to tell you, but I, for one, would say that, the role of somebody like yourself in so energetically and passionately raising this agenda in the ways that you are is absolutely critical to hopefully realizing that outcome that you're working towards.
It's really hard. It's really hard though when everybody was like, Sarah was a watershed moment, and it could happen again. And so like that's where I think that the conversations have changed. I think that that young women are having conversations that we only used to have at 2 a.m. when we were drunk, telling about the horror shows of our experiences with men, most of which that were intimate with us. And that now we're talking about it with our dads, we're talking about it with our brothers. I think younger women are growing up with a different anger and a different capacity, which I think is good progress. But I look back at what has happened. The Met has not changed. The Met took a 380-page report, the Casey review, which I testified to, and all they came back with was it's not institutional. So like I had never been at all interested in the Met or in policing, but like only 1 in 10 police officers found guilty of gross misconduct in this country lose their jobs. And it's like, and at that point, the 1 in 10 has done something criminal. And the bar shouldn't be that low. You shouldn't be allowed to have anonymity behind a badge that you don't deserve. And this is the thing, if there's no real hunger or thirst for reform, they just want it off the front pages. They have no intention of actually fixing any of it. The fact that nobody's been accountable for Carrick or Cousins or a litany of others makes it really, really difficult. Like my blinders came off, and that's the big thing is I wasn't able to put them back on and go back to work. I wasn't able to just go back to a normal existence where I can pretend that this stuff will never touch me given my socioeconomic status and given that I'm an expat. I can't just let it go, and I can't return to pre-pandemic life.
Jamie, I knew we weren't going to be able to do real justice in 20 minutes to introduce you and your background, but thank you for being, so incredibly open and sharing that with us. It was horrifying and energizing in kind of equal measure. Can we move on now to introduce Kenneth Roth's article in Human Rights Watch from 2020? Would you mind just introducing the article, the kind of key points of it to our listeners, and then we'll pick out whatever the most interesting points were from it.
I didn't reread it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I should have reread it last night and I forgot.
Okay, no problem at all. In terms of the report, which I'll just allude to, obviously came out in 2020, and essentially it was quite a positive report, really, on what had happened post.
I'm not going to repeat this back in my voice if you want to just give me.
No, it's okay, Jamie. I'm happy to introduce it. So, I think the report essentially was suggesting that certainly progress has been made, or was suggesting that progress had been made post the Me Too movement, with improvements in the way that both government and organisations, employers, were looking to approach the issues around women's safety in the workplace. But it did go on to suggest that obviously there's still a lot more room for growth and development and improvement. What I'm really keen to get from you, Jamie, is obviously this is all sort of around the timing of your work with Reclaim the Streets, etc. From a commercial perspective and a workplace perspective, can you just touch upon whether or not from this art report, which was 2020 to now, do you think things have improved? And if they have, in what areas? And if they've not, in certain areas, what are those areas?
I think it's really hard, given the bravery and tenacity that the women that did Me Too showed, to be critical of it. But I think that the aftermath of Me Too has really been that corporations and companies have much stronger NDAs and they manage women out of the process much quicker. I don't think that much work or much addressing of the actual behavior that creates those charges is made. When I speak to universities and lecture in universities, and people ask me something that has surprised me the most about all of it, and HR isn't there for you. HR is there to protect the company and protect the liability of the company. I would never recommend that young women think that the nice HR lady is going to get your harasser out of your organization, because it's just not realistically what happens. And the opportunities for white men to fail upwards is just presenting itself time and time again. We have not made really many strides in stopping the behavior that happens and when it happens, and nipping it in the bud and really calling out that behavior. It's about the reporting processes. It's about what is the payout and how you get out of that company and how you're not hireable again. So I really think that we have done ourselves a disservice in thinking that, this new uprising of couple of heads on sticks that mean that it's not going to happen again really make that much of a difference, when in actuality, women that are deemed to be ringing the bell, or like me, and problematic and call everything out and always have too much to say about everything, it's not easy to get hired. It's not easy to continue a career. Like the organization Tomorrow Group that I work for now, I was brought in as their motivational speaker 3 years ago. And that's how they ended up bringing me in. But that's a deep commitment, because they allow me to still do my activism. Because it's really hard to hire a PR person who's on TV calling attention to the fallacies of the police commissioner.
Out of interest, Jamie, and there's some super interesting points to pull from that. But you say that, I mean, again, tell me if I'm getting this totally wrong, but almost there are two issues at play here. There is the broader, wider kind of cultural norms, if you like, that you perfectly alluded to before, regarding how men essentially view women and how men are educated and encouraged and nurtured in order to view women and the way they interact with women in a different way. And then there's almost the organizational involvement and what an organization can do in order to make their space, their workplace, as safe as it possibly can be for women. I want to touch on the second bit. Have you got any examples of organizations you're aware of that you think do that well? Or is it just across the board, no one's yet cracked it?
No, so the organization I'm with right now, like our head of people, really goes into quite detail about if you're out with clients and something happens, that sales targets are never more important than your safety and things like that. Because I think so often we put young women in a very competitive sales environment where you've got to be one of the boys, you've got to get the sale over the line. If you don't get it over the line, you don't have your job. And that kind of environment makes women feel like it's battle scars rather than, and you're almost like, oh, I could hack it. I got through. I'm not like those that are crying in the corner because they just couldn't come to the strip club or they couldn't do this. And so legislation in the UK is changing a bit about that as well. But when you are looking at women need to get home in a different way because they are still on your dime. They're still part of your responsibility. So if I were to take a taxi, I would take a taxi personally. I would take a taxi and put it on work. And things like that, that it's got to be a real understanding of lived experiences, not just something on paper. And I think when you have mentoring programs, when you have whistleblowing hotlines, when you have different ways that you're making it really clear what the sexual harassment policies are, and that those policies are not just about people employed by your company, but they're about anybody that you touch in the realm of working in your job. And that the way that that's addressed, I talk a lot about training is so important, and the way training is done. It's the difference between sex ed training being an old VHS tape and somebody rolling it in and just playing it and walking away, and informed consent training. And the companies that want their employees to flourish, they don't want to deal with sick leave and stress leave. They've got counseling services that are available. Companies that look at you as an entire person that will have issues with menopause, that will have issues with caring for a dying parent, that will have issues with losing a baby. Like those employers that treat you like an all-around person and are thinking about all of the areas where it can fall down. I think those are the employers that you want to thrive for and you see as more of a part of your life rather than a job that you check in and check out of. And for me, at least, I've been really lucky with the organization I'm in. Not only do they spend a lot of time on it, but like with situations like this, they come to me and say, what have you seen elsewhere? Who's doing it well? Who's doing it badly? How are we doing? How do we match up? And to be able to take that kind of critique, I think takes an organization that really takes it to heart and thinks that the more they are all around good people looking to better the world, and the more that they are thinking about a philosophy that is anti-greenwash and really wants it to happen, not just a way to get an award and to get some people through the door.
Beautifully and summarized and positioned, Jamie. Let me ask you, if you were advising an organization out there that perhaps was really looking at this for the first time, what would your number one piece of advice be for that, that head of HR, that head of people?
Well, it's similar to B Corp. A couple of years ago, I was trying to pitch an umbrella organization about women's welfare at work. So from posting salaries when you first come in, to sexual harassment, to menopause, to flex appeal. And that would overarch all of it, which is really about the betterment of humans that work for you. And everybody was like, oh my God, you'll get so much press and nobody will pay for it. And that's the reality, is we don't look at this as being part of the umbrella of everyone's lives. And our safety, our security, our kids being fed, us being able to get to work. Like the pandemic, if anything, made us all question and reevaluate what our position is in terms of community and the bigger world. And a lot of people have decided that the most important is keeping you and your family safe and nothing else. And some people are really the other way, that are like, that if we don't all succeed, none of us do. And I think that your company's view on that is really, really crucial in deciding where you want to be and where you want to spend your time and how you want to interact with people in time and how you want those policies. If you want somewhere that you're just going in, you're checking out, you're doing your job, that's fine. But if you want somewhere where all of your boxes are being ticked and they understand who you are as a person, then it's a very different thing. And there's a payoff, You can make a lot more money when there's no humans in the equation.
Well, I was going to just pick up on that, Jamie, because that's obviously a very fair point. But you mentioned coming up with this B Corp equivalent, if you like, for women's sort of experience within the workplace. I'm butchering this, but summarizing, and that you got loads of press, but no one will pay for it. What that astonishes me. Like, are there not? It'd be great for you to perhaps touch upon all of the benefits, if you like, to the organization in terms of retention, recruitment, etc., that would come possibly from adopting that kind of approach. Why wasn't that so in the front of minds of organizations, do you think?
Just that it would have been really expensive in terms of, if you're looking at being completely transparent about all of the weaknesses and all of the areas, like if you are not showing women salaries at the beginning and then they stay longer, and women aren't in the pool that can go and get internationally transferred, and women aren't in the pool because they might have kids, so they're out of the workforce for a little bit, then menopause, then caring for a family, and it really highlighted all of the areas that we fall down, and all of the areas that then explain the gender gap, the gender wage gap. And that's the thing, is people want to just put out the gender wage gap once a year. I was trying to look at all of the factors that build into it and lead into it, that then you could prevent a lot of them. But in terms of like B Corps and stuff, again, like people did that because they were getting more business out of it. This would be expensive, and yes, women would stay, but you're not getting a great financial benefit in a time where everything has been in a wage crisis, you know?
How do you see it playing out? Like, how do you see the corporate workplace developing and evolving? Like, where do you hope that through the work that you're doing, not just with Tomorrow, but with Reclaim the Streets, like, where do you want this to head to?
The biggest change I've seen recently is the Giselle Pellicott saying shame has got to change sides. And I think that is the revolution right now that I'm seeing and envisioning, is like young girls and younger women not taking this on themselves and not beating themselves up for a situation they got themselves into when somebody was inappropriate, where they hit a little bit more, they didn't go out as much, or they stopped going to work dinners because something had happened. And so often swerve and we avoid and we try to make our lives smaller so that we can exist in our best state. And I don't think that we have given ourselves forgiveness for a lot of the things that has happened to us. And I think women spend so much of their time avoiding conflict and avoiding what's going to happen and going the long way or switching jobs. I was talking about the tax you pay for being a woman, of living closer to the station so you're not doing a longer walk home, and paying for a more expensive gym, paying for a more expensive building with cameras, paying more Ubers. And honestly, it is exhausting. And when so much of your existence is just doing these memory muscle activities just to get home safe, it's really difficult. And I think I, for one, am pretty heartbroken to have somebody that was seen as a rapist and a convict elected to the highest office in the country. And then with America, with Matt Gaetz, who's also been accused of underage sexual assault of a number of women and paying underage girls, to see those people rise up is so unjust that I'm mourning it, and I'm mourning the America that I knew. And I think that's going to take a really long time to reinforce that our safety and our minds and our bodies are worth more than that.
Jamie, you position this all in such a, as I say, such an unnerving and upsetting way, but also, with such, with such energy behind it. Let me ask you about regulation and the impact of regulation and the role that governments can play in this. Like, again, can you highlight any examples of any governments around the world that you think are doing great work in this area and are enabling women's safety to improve?
So actually, Katrin Hull and Betsy Stanko were the women between Operation Soteria, and they are in the UK, and they've done incredible work. And it is a way of making rape prosecutions focus on the rapist and not the victim. And right now, the rape prosecution rate in England and Wales is 1.7%. And that makes rape not prosecutable by basically all means. And the hardest thing for me to admit out loud is that I would be less likely to report an attack now than I was 4 years ago when I started this work. And that's from having witnessed what happens and witnessed police reactions and witnessed that your life ends for those 4 years it takes to get to court, and then you basically have less than any chance of having any actual justice. The only time we talk about justice for women is when women are dead, and that is just disgusting. And so because you're talking about 98% of rapists going free, it's really, really hard to encourage women to stand up for themselves and to fight for themselves and to pursue justice and to give them the mythology of a world where the world wants us to be safe and the world wants us to be at our top form. And what I want for all of us is to have a place where stop dehumanizing each other, because that's where the break, when kids are like 9 and 10 and the other becomes dark and scary and we separate and we lose the respect. Because the more that we all feel better about the conversations we're having and the depth and the ability of men and women to communicate and to flourish and to raise good kids, that's where we move on together. And that's where we move to a much better place where there is respect and there's consent and there's an understanding of ongoing consent. Because it's an awful way to try to date right now and tell your friends where you are in case you end up dead. Like, no, but that's the worst way to meet people and to have curiosity about people and to explore people. And that's the thing is we want this to flourish. We want all of us to do better, and we want our kids to be kinder than we were, but we need to do it in a way that has a lot more humanity and isn't just about the dollar and isn't just about how much money or how much people are succeeding, but is really about the way we collectively view humanity and where we're going forward.
Oh, Jamie, it's brilliant. I mean, well, it's not brilliant, but the way that you're describing that, it's compelling to say the least. That's a brilliant kind of, visionary tale, if you like, for how we as a global society, if you
Here's
like,
a mini example. So very tiny example. In the highway code, there's a question: if you pull up to a zebra crossing and an old person is going too slow, what do you do? And the answer is wait. But there's nothing in the highway code about that you can't yell at women out your car and yell something at them. My ideal utopia is 3 teenage boys are in the car, one of them yells at a woman, and the other 2 are so embarrassed they never get in a car with them again. The social saying, absolutely not. That's so crappy. That is not okay. That's so embarrassing. And making that a pariah, that's where I want to be, is where we understand what respect gives us in relationships and how it lets us all interact with each other and flourish.
Super compelling visionary statement for us as a global society. Thank you, Jamie. Let's finish though we always finish the show with a magic wand question relating to the commercial world. So let me ask you, if we were to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I would put the same amount of research and R&D dollars into women's health. I think if we brought women's health and if we eliminated all of the maladies that could easily be fixed, and just haven't had the concentration, we could really, really strengthen the relationship, strengthen how people flourish, and not let women be debilitated by things that should have been researched and fixed a million years ago. We spend more on Viagra than we do on breast cancer.
So I was just going to ask you, Jamie, for some examples of those areas that could be researched to a greater extent. Like that's one of them.
So like in Spain for endometriosis and bad period pain, they've just given 3 days extra off every month. And that makes women really harder to hire because they could end up having a million days off rather than stopping the women suffering. Stop the root cause of the suffering. I don't want more time to suffer. I want not to suffer and to flourish. And that's the thing is this idea of the murkiness of women's health is because we haven't done the due diligence. We haven't spent the time. We don't look into fibroids. We don't look into cysts. the birth control pill hasn't been updated in 70 years. And so it's had we spent that amount of time on keeping women healthy and flourishing, you get a lot more out of us. You get better results, and there's less people growing up with women in pain.
Here, Jamie. I think it seems like a very reasonable magic wand request. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us this morning. That was a fascinating conversation. I, for one, have learned a lot from it. So thank you for being so open and sharing it with us.
And thank you for the wide-ranging plethora of things we could talk about.
Brilliant.